Fabulous. Well, I'm delighted to talk to you all about the bat of Hawaii, the bats of Hawaii, which is one species. So first off, I want to give you a little bit of background about bats in general before we talk about the Opeapea and what makes them special. So the first thing is that bats are mammals, they're not birds, and they're also not rodents. So although a lot of people think of them as flying mice, and they seem to have a similar body size, on the right we have a gigantic tree of the mammals, and within the green, I don't have a pointer here, but you can see that there's zebras and whales, and above them, carnivores with wolves, and in the middle are bats. So bats basically evolved a really long time ago before whales started looking like whales and wolves started looking like wolves. And mice, you can see, are really distantly related in the blue section, and they're actually closer related to primates and us than they are to bats. So that said, bats also are pretty unique in that they have evolved flight. So if we look at all the bones in our human hands and arms and those in a bird, bats' wings are made up of those same arm bones. So Chiroptera, the order that bats belong to, actually means hand wings. So you can see that all the little bones that make up their wings are actually just their hands spread out really far. And they do that differently than the bones that birds have used to do that. All right. The next thing I want to broadly share about bats is that there's a lot of them. So they are a fifth of all mammal species. So this is a pie chart showing all the different kinds of rodents in yellow. There's tons. But right after rodents is bats. So there are 1,409 species of bats to date, and we keep discovering some new ones. But they vastly outnumber all the other things we see: primates in blue and all the other groups of mammals in purple. All right. And another thing that really distinguishes bats from rodents, so we do have a hoary bat on the left here, is that they're really long-lived and they reproduce really slowly. So what you can see is the bat held in a blue glove, and then the gray bit on its belly is actually an entire baby bat. So they're born at 30% of their mother's body weight, which is pretty freaking substantial. So bats are the longest lived mammals for their body size. So we have records of bats living 41 years. Hawaiian hoary bats are probably closer to the 10 or 12-year mark, but that's still considerably longer than things like rodents, which last maybe a year or so. And rodents, which can have large litters multiple times a year, are very different from bats that usually have 1 or 2 offspring a year. So the Hawaiian hoary bat will give birth to twins at a time. But we don't even know if they do that every year. Okay, so now I'd like to focus on the Hawaiian hoary bat. The Opeapea is the Hawaiian name for it. And so this is a bat that was captured on Maui, and it's resting on a gloved hand. So you can get an idea for how small they are. It's closer to the size of like a shaker of salt. All right, so the Opeapea are Hawaii's only native land mammal. So they have that distinction of the only mammal that made it to Hawaii that is not aquatic on their own. They are endemic, meaning they occur nowhere else in the world. And they're also, like so many of Hawaii's animals, endangered. All right, so this is coming up a short video of a Hawaiian hoary bat in hand. Just licking his lips. So my click, oh, there's my clicker. So little eye, little wing, and thumb there. So gives you an idea for their faces. All right, so let's see, the slide's catching up. All right, so the origin of the name Opeapea is, I believe, related to the idea of half-leaf. So we have a wing of a hoary bat on the left, and you can see the fingers showing through the wing membrane, and its resemblance to a taro leaf on the right, and the thick veins that are in there. So that shape is the similarity that they derive their name from. The common name in English is Hawaiian hoary bat, and often people will make jokes about maybe them being a little bit loose, but actually it's because they look like they're covered in hoarfrost. So in the picture on the right, we have some frost that looks similar to the bat's fur that has the silvery tips. All right, so Hawaiian hoary bats have been found on all of the islands, including recently Kaho'olawe. So they occur throughout. All right, so recently they have been proposed to be a completely unique species from the mainland species of hoary bat. They're about 30% smaller than the mainland species. They tend to be a lot more red. And so to give you an idea for their size, they weigh about 15 grams, which is somewhere between a AA and a AAA battery. So incredibly light. And then if you're going to measure them from wingtip to wingtip, it's about a foot, which is a little bit less than you would think because the body is such a small proportion of that inside. All right. So what they eat, all Hawaiian hoary bats are insect eaters. So although there are many bats in the world that are fruit eaters and pollinators and blood drinkers, Hawaiian hoary bats' gig is moths and beetles. Flying termites are a big favorite. And we're doing some work looking at what genetics we find in their feces of the insects to see if that we can find other species that they're eating. So that's that guy chomping down. Oh, we missed, there we go. So the next thing about them is that unlike many bats that roost in caves and make really large aggregations, Hawaiian hoary bats are really solitary. They roost in trees and they roost among the leaves. So instead of going into a big cavity or making large colonies, they're really cryptic. And so this coloration in their fur is meant to camouflage them and make them look like dead leaves. They're also super fluffy because of this to stay really well insulated. And this is probably one of the reasons that they give birth to twins, so that the two pups can cuddle together. So that's interesting. A lot of people say they will see bats in lava tubes, and they might occasionally go in there to look for moths. But for the most part, they are big, high, open foragers. All right, so one thing that really impresses me about the Hawaiian hoary bat, as I've mentioned, we'll see if we'll get this to play. So this is one on the left, getting ready to take off in slow-mo, is that recent genetics show that these bats arrived in Hawaii probably 1.35 million years ago. So this would have been before Big Island had even formed. So they'd be a large part of the history of Hawaii. And then they would have flown 2,200 miles from California, which is pretty ridiculous. They obviously had the assistance of trade winds. But even that, some biologists worked out the math. They can fly about 30 miles an hour, and that would have been 4 days and nights of nonstop flying. So they're definitely voyagers, and it makes me think of the Polynesians and the way they went to explore the oceans. So we also know from genetics that mainland hoary bats made this journey twice. So there are two different times that a new group of Hawaiian hoary bats have arrived in Hawaii and brought new genetics, thousands of years apart. So that's another thing that really impresses me about these guys. So I wanted to keep a lot of that short so I'd have lots of time for questions at the end. But one more thing, next slide, is to talk about threats to hoary bats on the mainland and in Hawaii is they're affected by wind energy. So bats are killed at wind energy facilities. It happens mostly during the fall mating period, and we're still learning a lot about why that's happening and how to prevent it. So there is work being done to change when turbines are operational, to have them on not as much at night or not as much when not windy nights. And so this has been in the news quite a bit. We're trying to understand how many endangered species are going to be allowed to be killed. And a really challenging thing about this is that we don't know the population size. So that makes it really hard to understand what the effects of these deaths is going to be on the population if you don't know how many of them there are. And some things I kind of pointed out earlier that make it difficult to count them is that they're solitary, so we can't go to one big cave and count them all. And they fly really fast and really far, so they can move around the island quite easily. And they are really cryptic during the day in their tree roosts. So that makes the simple part of counting them quite a challenge. All right, so my 5 facts to recap are that the Opeopea are Hawaii's only native land mammal, which is quite a feat. They're solitary, unlike many bats living in trees, not roosting in caves. They're insectivorous, not feeding on any fruit, and that they have a really slow life history, so that it takes a long time for a mother bat to raise her pups, and they're going to live a long time if they're allowed to do so. And finally, that they're really epic in that they made it to Hawaii on their own, like so many bird species. So with that, I'd really look forward to your questions, and thank you for your time.